Hey guys, Troy here. Welcome to the Striker Blade YouTube channel. Today I will be sharing with you my thoughts on the Sony RX10 Mark IV, specifically what I'd like to see in the next revision of this camera, the Mark V. I have been using this camera for the last 2 years and I've taken over 20,000 photos and thousands of hours of video, so the feedback that I'm providing is way more valuable than any other tech YouTuber because there's no way any big channel has used this camera more than me. I'll be breaking down this video into 3 categories, first being hypothetical things that would really benefit this camera but not too likely to happen. Next would be tech that Sony has already created that should make its way into this camera, and I'll wrap things up with some features that I would not change going into the next revision. In my opinion, the biggest drawback of this camera is the dead zone when taking portraits. If you're trying to take a picture from the hips up, there isn't a focal length where this camera gives you a really good background blur. If you're taking a picture from the chin to the head, then yes, but any other composition won't give you the desired blur. I would like to see a minimum f8 at 80 millimeters. This won't solve the problem completely, but it will give us much better portrait capabilities. For reference, at 80 millimeters, the largest the aperture goes is f3.5. Next feature I'd like to see would be a faster servo motor for the zoom. This camera can take class-leading 24 frames a second, autofocus as quick as 3 milliseconds, but those highlights are negated by having a slow zoom ring. Even on the quickest zoom setting, if you're taking a picture of an animal moving towards you or away from you, maybe 3 of the 24 images you can take in a second will be decently framed. I'd even be happy with a manual, mechanical zoom ring like on a traditional DSLR lens. Additionally, I'd like to see a change in the software to make the focus ring linear. Currently, if you turn the ring 90 degrees fast, it will move the focal plane out to the horizon. But if you move it the same 90 degrees slowly, the focal plane may only move 5 feet forward. At times, this can make the manual focus feel inconsistent. Next on my list would be a new feature. This would be focus bracketing. This is a photography technique used mostly in macro and landscape photography, where we take several pictures at different focal points and then merge them together in our photo editing program. It'd be great to have a shoot mode where we can tell the camera to take 12 pictures while moving the focus from 3 inches to 10 inches. Currently, doing this manually is very time consuming. Moving to video settings, I'd like to see a new layout for selecting video type. Currently it lists all the formats as one big list. I'd like to see it be changed to select resolution, and then frame rate, and lastly bit rate. I'd like to see higher bitrate options for 1080p and 4K. I'd like to see 240 FPS 1080p with unlimited record time. This would give us a buttery smooth 8x slow motion, and 4K up to 120 FPS, which would give us brilliant 4x slow-mo in 4K. At minimum, the most likely thing we'll see on the Mark V would be 4K 60 FPS video. I've talked about slow-mo a bit. Let's move to high frame rate modes. This allows you to record 3 or 4 seconds at ridiculously fast speeds. Currently, this camera records at a low resolution and then stretches the video to 1080p. Let's remove this stretching from HFR video. If it's recorded at 720p, give us a 720p file. Let us decide if we want to enlarge it. Additionally, almost every smartphone can do 960 FPS at full 1080p resolution, so this camera needs to be competitive with that. 480 FPS and 960 FPS at 1080p resolution is expected. I'd like to see 4K 240 FPS at full resolution. I know this camera isn't built around slow-mo, but I think for it to stay competitive in the market, it'd be great to have a 2000 FPS or maybe even a 4000 FPS HFR video setting. That would be awesome. Let's wrap things up here with a few things I would not change. I'm not super up to date on Sony's latest cameras, but I think they've removed the smartphone control function in some of their new offerings. This isn't a critical feature to keep, but it is a feature I have used in the past. Next is the tilt screen. I have used cameras where the screen articulates and pops out, and I've really never missed that feature using this camera. I know it would benefit vloggers, but there are many other options better suited for vlogging. The sensor I would not change. I've watched several reviews on this camera where they have commented on how it would be better if the camera was an APS-C size. This is wrong. If it becomes an APS-C size sensor, the crop factor would change. We would lose our f4 at 600 millimeters. We'd lose 24 FPS shooting. So many features just wouldn't perform as well if the sensor was made larger. Additionally, I would not want a higher megapixel sensor. Higher megapixel means that the pixels on the sensor are smaller. Typically, smaller pixels are less sensitive to light, giving us less clarity in the image. The downsides of having a larger sensor with higher megapixels are too high for me to want them. Now, don't get me wrong, if Sony can deliver a sensor that's higher resolution, better low light performance, less grain, and so on, I'd be all for that. Better is better. I just wouldn't want better at the expense of other areas. Another thing I hear in many reviews is a longer focal length lens. This camera doesn't need this. In the 20,000 plus pictures I have taken, I have never thought, wow, I really need more zoom. This camera can take pictures of Saturn's rings and Jupiter's Galilean moons. Admittedly, these objects are better to look at through a high-end telescope, but you get the point. If you need more zoom with this camera, then you should probably rethink your composition for the shoot. Last thing, the touchscreen and menus. I'm mentioning this last intentionally because it seems to be the first thing every tech reviewer wants to complain about when it comes to this camera, and let me tell you, everything else I have talked about improving would make the next version way better than changing the touchscreen menus. Look, I get it. It's 2020. Every touchscreen in the world by now is this amazing responsive display, and the touchscreen on this camera doesn't match that. And it doesn't need to. We really don't need to navigate menus through the touchscreen. We don't. I'd imagine it takes a ton of software developing and coding to make the touchscreen control everything on the display, and if it were up to me, I'd put it last on the list of where to spend the budget, because redoing the menus and such to be touch doesn't make the images look any better. It doesn't improve low light performance or high ISO grain. On top of that, the camera has buttons to be programmed to control every function of this camera. You should never be opening the menu to change the white balance or file type. All of those things can be mapped to buttons so you can change them while you're shooting. On top of all of that, there's a setting in the menu to make a custom menu. The only settings that I use that aren't mapped to a button are Format, Smartphone Control, and Steady Shot. It's absurd to hear people complain about menus on a camera. You shouldn't be spending any time in the menus on a camera when taking pictures or videos. You should be looking through the viewfinder. So those are my thoughts on what I'd like to see in the next RX10 model. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Don't forget to subscribe. It's completely free and you can change your mind at any time. Hit like, and I'll see you guys next time.